Well, as you can tell, I'm still having a substantial amount of problem with my voice, so I'm going to try to record as much as I can tonight. Apologize for getting this up so late, but my wife and I, Pam and I, were out west in the desert, did some business meetings this week, and it didn't really contribute to my voice's recovery all that much. So I'll do as much as I can tonight. I'll resume a little bit more next week, although I will be traveling again next week, and I'll get things up as I can, depending on my travel schedule. I'll also, so I would appreciate your prayers as I try to get over this sinus infection and its effects on my voice. As you know, each week we talk about the various convergence of events that seem to indicate that the return of the Lord is ever closer. One of those things that we look at is apostasy in the church. In verse 3 of 2 Timothy chapter 4, it says this: "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables." I have a couple of examples of that just have come to my attention recently. First is pastor of America's largest church, Lakewood Church in Houston, given a couple weeks ago, talking about his approach.
You've been criticized for church light.
Yeah, that's right.
For a cotton candy message. Do you feel like you're cheating people by not telling them about the hell part?
No, I really don't, because it's a different approach. You know, it's not hellfire and brimstone, but I say most people are beaten down enough by life. They already feel guilty enough. They're not doing what they should do, raising their kids, or we can all find reasons. So I want them to come to Lakewood or our meetings and be lifted up to say, you know what, I may not be perfect, but I'm moving forward. I'm doing better, and I think that motivates you to do better.
Well, I don't think that requires any additional comment by me, but it's clear that sound doctrine is not a priority at Lakewood, and you should take note of that. Another thing that happened yesterday in Los Angeles was the Azusa Now at the Los Angeles Coliseum. It was organized by Lou Engle of The Call. It was to celebrate the 110th anniversary of the Azusa Revival, which took place in Azusa, California in 1906. I've been looking at some of the videos. There's probably enough there to do several series on apostasy, as the people such as Lou Engle and the New Apostolic Reformation gathered together with other evangelicals and Roman Catholics and other groups in supposedly the beginning of a great revival. Doctrine and truth had very little to do with what was going on there. For example, one of the groups that was there were these First Nations people, American Indians, that take pagan Indian tribal rituals and dances and symbolism and try to convert or put a veneer of Christianity over them. I think if you want to understand what's wrong with that movement, Sandy Simpson at Deception in the Church has done a very excellent analysis of that, and I would highly recommend that you look at the material that's there. One of the things that we saw at this revival was Lou Engle falling down at the feet of a Roman Catholic priest and kissing the feet of the Roman Catholic priest, and then the favor was returned. The Roman Catholic priest said, "Doctrine is not important. We shouldn't focus on what divides us doctrinally. Doctrine wasn't important to Jesus." So this is an example of, I think, a perfect example of end-time apostasy, and as I have time to go through the videos of that 12-hour-long event, I will try to bring forth some of the other things that took place at that event. Another sign of, I would call it apostasy, of falling away from the truth, is the treatment of the restored nation of Israel. Now, we know that Israel will be restored, brought back to the land initially in unbelief. the end time events could not unfold the way that the prophets predict unless the Jewish nation of Israel was back in the land. There will be an increasing number of attacks on the nation of Israel as we go forward here in the end times. As we go forward in the end times, you can expect an increasing number of attacks on the nation of Israel. For example, here is the UN Human Rights Council recently naming Israel as the world's top human rights violator. They have ISIS, they have all of the Muslim countries, they have other repressive dictatorships, but the one that really bothers them is Israel. This also comes into the evangelical church through people like Walter Brueggemann from Columbia Theological Seminary down in Atlanta, Decatur, Georgia. He wrote a book recently called Chosen, Reading the Bible Amid the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. Look at what he says the goal of his book is. The goal of the book is to argue that there is no method of interpretation which would allow the promises made to ancient Israel to be applied to modern Israel. Quote, "It is my hope that the Christian community in the United States will cease to appeal to the Bible as a direct support for the state of Israel." Now, Brueggemann is very influential in the emerging church, and you can expect that this book will be very influential. Caroline Glick looked a little bit at this in her column this week, Inconvenient Genocide. Listen to what she says. She's talking about the recent recognition by the United States State Department that there was genocide going on in Syria and Iraq of Christians and other groups. It took months and months and months for the Obama administration to come to this conclusion. Listen to what Caroline says in an article Friday in the Jerusalem Post. The Christian communities of Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon are well on the way to joining their Jewish cousins. The Jewish communities of these states predated Islam by a millennium and were vibrant until the 20th century. But the Arab world's war on the Jewish state, and more generally on Jews, wiped out the Jewish population several decades ago. And now the Christian communities, which like the Jews predate Islam, are being targeted for eradication. True, after years of deliberately playing down the issue and denying the problem, the Obama administration is finally admitting it exists. The State Department finally acknowledged the obvious on March 25th, when Secretary of State John Kerry stated that Islamic State is conducting a genocide of Christians, Yazidis, and Shiites. The statement of John Kerry is absolutely stunning when you analyze it. I won't torch you with all of what he said. I will give you one of his conclusions. Listen to how John Kerry describes the solution to this problem of genocide of Christians and others in the Middle East.
So we must bear in mind, after all, that the best response to genocide is a reaffirmation of the fundamental right to survive of every group targeted for destruction. What Daesh wants to erase, we must preserve. That requires defeating Daesh, but it also demands the rejection of bigotry and discrimination, those things that facilitated its rise in the first place.
So bigotry and discrimination, not the ideology of Islam, is what caused the problem. This man is a complete fool, as we've demonstrated many times here in the past. Caroline continues, one of the appalling aspects of ISIS' deliberate open targeting of Christians for destruction is how little resistance it has received from local Sunni populations. As Raymond Ibrahim from the David Horowitz Freedom Center has scrupulously documented, the local Sunnis have not stood up for their Christian neighbors who have lived side by side with them for hundreds of years. Rather, in areas that have been conquered by ISIS, the local Sunnis have collaborated with their genocidal masters in raping and murdering Christian neighbors, plundering their property, destroying their churches, and driving them from their ancestral homes. The Easter massacre in Pakistan was further evidence that wherever radical Islamists gain power, they use it to murder Christians. And as Larry Franklin from the Gatestone Institute noted in a recent article, the exodus of Christians from the Palestinian Authority is the direct consequence of the deliberate persecution of Christians by the Palestinian Authority. That's probably not something that you heard at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference. Beyond refusing to take the necessary steps to ensure that persecuted Christians are rescued from annihilation, the State Department has been rejecting visa requests from Christian activists and leaders from persecuted communities to visit the U.S. to share information about the suffering with the American public. This at the same time that the administration has welcomed Muslim jihadi sympathizers, including Muslim Brotherhood members, to Washington. In another report, the group explained that the Western media has avoided covering the story of the Islamic genocide of Middle East Christians because of, quote, misplaced embarrassment about the 19th century colonial powers evangelizing the natives in far-flung places. This then brings us back to Israel and the Jews, and you can read the whole article. I'm just reading you some excerpts from it. She concludes with this: the same ideological prejudice that refuses to recognize that the Islamic State is Islamic, refuses to recognize that jihad is unique to Islam, refuses to recognize that Christians as religious minorities are being targeted for annihilation, and refuses to recognize that Christians of the Middle East are ancient peoples who have lived in their communities since the dawn of Christianity, also refuses to recognize the rights of the Jewish people as the indigenous people of the land of Israel. This is the reason that Western governments, led by the Obama administration, are unwilling to defeat ISIS. This is why they are giving preference to Muslim asylum seekers who they are incapable of screening over Christians who it is unnecessary to screen. This is the reason that the same governments are far more willing to attack Jews for living beyond the 1949 armistice lines in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, the cradle of Jewish civilization in the heartland of the land of Israel, than they are willing to end their support for the Palestinian Authority, which sponsors and celebrates terrorism. This is why the same governments eagerly embrace every allegation of Israeli racism, real or imagined, while they ignore or even fund racist Palestinian efforts to deny Jewish history, a history which leads to the inevitable conclusion that the Jews are the indigenous people of the land of Israel. The reason Obama refuses to protect Middle East Christians from extinction is because he cannot rescue them, either on the ground or by ensuring they can flee to safety, without abandoning his ideological faith that the only natives of the Middle East are the Muslims. It's a great article. You should be sure you get Friday Jerusalem Post, April 8th, and read that. Now, look, one of the things that I think is happening is that because of the refusal to recognize the nation of Israel, I believe the European countries and the United States are having problems with this migration problem. Here's an interesting picture. These are some immigrants recently going through Europe. You will note that there are 11 people in that photograph. 7 of them are males, but look at the difference. So there are 7 males, 7 able-bodied males, 1 female, and 3 children. Look at how the female is dressed. She's in bare feet. It's obviously very cold. She's essentially taking care of the 3 kids and carrying other things, and the other guys are not helping her. The Investigative Project on Terrorism has recently come out with a report showing that there has been an incredible increase through 2015, which is the last year they have data available, deaths from Islamic attacks worldwide. They are now over 30,000, many, many times more than from any other terrorist group or terrorist-related group or rebel group. The Global Terrorism Database maintained by the University of Maryland through 2014, when they have their data available, shows that it's Islamic countries where the most attacks are occurring. You can see sort of a graphic representation of what's going on in Africa, Europe, and Asia on this graphic. But Europe has continued to have a problem. And the question that's asked, this is an editorial from Investors Business Daily, what has Europe done to them? Look at how it starts out. Europe's Muslims despise the West and its culture, surveys show. The only thing surprising is that European governments continue to invite hundreds of thousands of them to make Europe their home. Look at some of the things reported in this editorial. Recent terrorist attacks of Paris, Belgium, and Britain, and a wave of brutal sexual assaults in at least 6 countries raise a logical question. Why do members of the religion of peace so despise the place that has embraced them, allowed them cultural and religious freedom, given them welfare, and even tolerated the glowing violence in their communities? A 2013 survey found significant hostility of Muslims in Europe and an unwillingness to integrate with European society. Almost 60% agree that Muslims should return to the roots of Islam. 75% think there is only one interpretation of the Quran possible to which every Muslim should stick, and 65% of them say that religious rules are more important to them than the laws of the country in which they live. And despite the welcome they get in Europe and the largesse doled out by EU's expansive welfare state, 54% of Europe's Muslims believe that the West is out to destroy Islam. It doesn't make any sense. The editorial continues, maybe we shouldn't be shocked. After all, the beliefs of Muslims around the world are starkly at odds with those in the West. Inside Europe, 42% of France's Muslims believe suicide attacks are okay. Feeling a bit smug about the U.S.? Don't. Here, 26% of younger Muslims in the U.S. believe suicide bombing is justified. We have a major problem, and our government refuses to do anything about it. There was also a report that just came out. The person who sort of helped popularize the term Islamophobia, this is reported on Breitbart just today, the UK equalities chief who popularized the term Islamophobia admits, I thought Muslims would blend into Britain. I should have known better. Listen to what he says. Liberal opinion in Britain has for more than 2 decades maintained that most Muslims are just like everyone else. Thanks to the most detailed and comprehensive survey of British Muslim opinion yet conducted, we now know that just isn't how it is. Again, they're not integrating into the culture. And this is a major problem. And I think it is related in great part to the way the nations are treating the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. Here's a report just from the Times of London today that the Mumbai bomber, the attacks that happened in Mumbai, India back in 2008 has now, they say, according to official reports, slipped into Europe. This is going to continue to be a major problem. Here's an interview with this man who has been convicted of participating with ISIS. He's returned to Belgium, and this is what he has to say.
If you spit in the air, there's going to be a moment the spit is going to fall in your own face. The attacks, it's a reaction. In every war has its casualties. So we Muslims, we believe in the life afterwards, and we believe that this life has only the value of proving ourselves against our creators.
That was a magazine here that had an article about it?
Yeah, it was one of the articles before the trial.
How many people do you know from your group of friends who've left for Syria, who went to join ISIS?
60.
60?
Yeah.
What happened to those 60 people?
A lot of them went to paradise. My dream is still to live underneath the Islamic caliphate, underneath the Islamic law. That's my dream.
Do you think that's ever going to happen here?
In Europe?
Yes.
There will be a day. Yes. It's a goal, and it's an Islamic goal.
You think sooner or later they'll make it to Europe?
I think they're already in Europe, because ISIS is not a group, it's an ideology.
I'm now going to play you a clip of a debate involving Mark Steyn and Nigel Farage in Canada, and Mark Steyn's response to a comment about the discussion was, the debate was talking about the rapes that are taking place among the immigrants in Europe. And I think a very inappropriate comment is made, and then Mark Steyn and Nigel Farage will respond.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just struck by how obsessed with sex these two guys are, really, actually. It's a bit sad, really, actually.
Lots of time in the cross-examination to get into these issues, but I want to come over to the other side, and Mark Stein, get your quick reaction to what you've heard.
Hey, I made a decision tonight that I wasn't going to do funny stuff. I was going to be deadly serious, and I'm slightly amazed at our colleagues' ability to get big laughs on gang rape. Madame Arbor scoffs at the newfound feminists over here. I'm not much of a feminist, but I draw the line at the 3-year-old getting raped and the 7-year-old getting gang raped in a basement. And when Simon tells us that, funnily enough, we're all obsessed, maybe we don't get enough action in the Toronto singles bars. Madame Arbor, as she said, is a feminist of a certain generation. And those feminists were very clear, as Madame Arbor was very clear in Sudan, that rape is not about sex, whatever Simon may say. Rape is about power, which is what Madame Arbor says. And we're not talking about the kind of sex I want to have. I ain't into 3-year-old girls. But the 14-year-old girl in Sudan, here's a random example from 10 days of German migrant crimes in January. 16-year-old boy raped inside Wolfsburg City Hall. 13-year-old girl sexually assaulted near a railway station in Elvagen. 3 girls sexually assaulted at a swimming pool in Ansbach. 15-year-old girl raped at a railway station in Wuppertal. Attempted gang rape of a 13-year-old girl in Gelsenkirchen. I can go on and on. These are all rapes, gang rapes in public places. Trains, streets, parks, and even City Hall. And I congratulate you on getting big laughs with that, Simon, and you, Louise, because if I'd known that, I'd be doing open night mic on gang rape at a comedy club. It isn't funny. It isn't funny.
Okay, Mark, we'll be able to get into this later. Your time is up.
We've lived through 100 years of female liberation and emancipation, and now we have the mayors of towns in Germany and in Sweden and in other parts of Northern Europe telling women not to walk out after dark on their own. And in the wake of the Cologne sex attacks, the mayor of Cologne said to those women they really ought to dress differently and behave differently in public. That, Simon, is what is sad, and actually I find the sheer hypocrisy of those of you that have stood up and said you're going to defend female rights when actually you think migrant rights are more important than female rights in our own community. Frankly, shame on you.
Look, we have a major problem in the world and country, and I think the actions of our president are sort of indicative of this. Here's an editorial again from Investors Business Daily talking about Obama's pardons put America at risk. Obama pardoned another 61 prisoners Wednesday, bringing the total number of felons whose sentences he has commuted to 248, more than all the previous 6 presidents going back to Gerald Ford combined. And he is not done yet. More than 10,000 clemency cases are pending, and the president has made approving them his top priority in his remaining days in office. 92 of them, or nearly 40% of the total pardon, were serving life sentences. I don't think this is something that the mainstream media has covered in the least. At the same time, the Obama regime has approved the early release of roughly half, more than 46,000, of all drug traffickers in the federal pen, including the kingpin of a multi-million-dollar operation that smuggled drugs from Canada to Maine. And here in Columbus, we had one of these people who was released get involved in an altercation and killed, I believe, 3 people. He's been charged with murder. But these are the people that Obama's releasing from prison. Now I want to turn to the subject that I started off talking about, end-time fascism. In my view, one of the things that will happen under a coming world leader will be control of thought and speech. And that's going to be done both through government and corporations. And I think it's a trend that we need to be aware of that's coming. In fact, I think it's already here, and I think we've seen some examples of it this week. Now, there was, within the last 2 weeks, there was, a week before last, there was a nuclear summit at the White House. Leaders of the world came in to talk about nuclear proliferation. And the president acknowledged that terrorists getting their hands on nuclear weapons is a matter of grave concern. At the meeting, I want you to listen very carefully to the clip that I'm going to show you. President Hollande of France was given a chance to speak, and he spoke about what was really on his mind. I want you to listen. You will hear him speaking, but he's speaking through an interpreter. And you will see that there's a place where things get a little bit unclear from the interpreter's standpoint. Listen to this.
Together with President Obama, we worked on coordinating further our commitments, our organizations, our services, when it comes to fighting against these terrorists. We are also making sure that between Europe and the United States, there can be a very high-level coordination. But we're also well aware that the roots of terrorism.
Et nous devons agir en Irak et en Syrie. C'est ce que nous faisons dans le cadre de la coalition. Et nous constatons que Daesh est en recul.
We note that Daesh is losing ground thanks to the strikes we've been able to launch with the coalition.
See, what happened was the interpreter's audio, when President Hollande talked about Islamist terrorism, in fact, here's a transcript that was on the White House website. I don't know if it's still up. We're also well aware, this is President Hollande's comments, well aware that the roots of terrorism, Islamist terrorism, is in Syria and in Iraq. But what the Obama administration did when they put up the video was they cut out the audio of the interpretation. Now, fortunately, because of the way closed captioning works on YouTube, the actual remarks of President Hollande were captured. But it was clear that they cut the audio of the interpreter out when she was interpreting the President Hollande's comments, and he made reference to Islamist terrorism. Now, the White House has said that, well, it was a technical glitch. But I think this is indicative of the thing that we're going to see, particularly if people such as in our current administration remain in power. And that's why the election is very important in my view. Now, here's a story from Colorado talking about incorporating diversity lessons. Listen to this. A 4-year-old Aurora girl was kicked out of a preschool last month when her parents raised questions about books read in her class, including ones that told stories about same-sex couples and worms unsure about their gender. Her mother, Arby Sinclair, sees it as sex education and wanted to opt her daughter out of those discussions. Instead, school officials from Montview Community Preschool and Kindergarten in Aurora, run as a private parent cooperative, explained that the stories were part of the school's anti-bias curriculum, and because the discussions are embedded through the day, they told her that opting out was not possible. The school's anti-bias curriculum is part of a growing push in public and private school classrooms where educators use more diverse depictions of families and gender roles to expose students to differences before children have a chance to form negative opinions. Director of this early childhood education in the Boulder Valley School District said this: biases start as kids get older and start to see differences as negative. At a young age, kids are exploring all different kinds of things. It's about just providing them with all these experiences. The mother responded, I think at this age they don't know what bias is. It's not that she isn't exposed to diversity because it is the world we live in, but how are they having these conversations? In Boulder's public preschools, all teachers were trained this year to integrate a broader type of diversity to include gender and sexual differences and to have conversations with young children. This is a fairly new topic to be discussing. We as leaders are learning as well. A queer endeavor, an initiative started in the School of Education at the University of Colorado at Boulder, has helped train 2,500 teachers over the past 3 years, including those in Boulder and in the St. Vrain Valley School District. Times are changing, said Bethany Lenardi, a research associate and co-founder of A Queer Endeavor. The only hesitations we've seen is that teachers have been really under-supported. So this is what we should see coming, that they're going to try to control thought and speech. And so this young lady, this 4-year-old, was kicked out of preschool and sent home because her parents did not want her exposed to this stuff at a very young age. Now, I want to go to another example. This, again, comes from Investors Business Daily. And the title of the editorial is Dissent Forbidden. Inquisition. Here's what it says. The top law enforcement officers in 16 states have formed a coalition to investigate and prosecute companies that don't agree with them on climate change. In other words, rejection of orthodoxy will be punished. Now, these are attorney generals of 16 states in the United States. These states: California, Connecticut, Illinois, Iowa, Maine, District of Columbia, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, Minnesota, Oregon, New Mexico, Virginia, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. And yes, I know that the District of Columbia is not a state. If you go to the website of Eric Schneiderman, who is the Attorney General of the state of New York, you will see a press release where he announced this coalition. I'm now going to play a clip from the news conference where this initiative was announced. And I want you to listen to it and objectively decide whether this seems to be a good thing or is this indicative of thought control. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to prosecute companies that don't toe the line on global climate change being caused by humans. Now, in the first place, global climate change, the data is not conclusive, in my view, that humans are causing this, or frankly, that global warming is a bad thing. More people die from cold, many times more people die from cold than die from heat. And so, but this is all about control. We have to control everything. We have to control thought. And what they're going to do is they're going to be prosecuting companies and individuals who don't toe the line on climate change. And they're going to do it as sort of they're committing fraud in their public statements. Where they say climate change is not occurring or we have nothing to do with climate change. And this is thought control. This is fascism writ large. So listen to this clip. Here is Eric Schneiderman at the press conference a week or so ago in New York.
But ladies and gentlemen, we're here for a very simple reason. We have heard the scientists. We know what's happening to the planet. There is no dispute, but there is confusion, and confusion sowed by those with an interest in profiting from the confusion and creating misperceptions in the eyes of the American public that really need to be cleared up. Today, in the face of the gridlock in Washington, we are assembling a group of state actors to send the message that we are prepared to step into this breach. And one thing we hope all reasonable people can agree on is that every fossil fuel company has a responsibility to be honest with its investors and with the public about the financial and market risks posed by climate change. These are cornerstones of our securities and consumer protection laws. We know, because of what's already out there in the public, that there are companies using the best climate science. They're using the best climate models so that when they spend shareholder dollars to raise their oil rigs, which they are doing, they know how fast the sea level is rising. Then they are drilling in places in the Arctic where they couldn't drill 20 years ago because of the ice sheets. They know how fast the ice sheets are receding. And yet they have told the public for years that there were no competent models. That was the specific term used by an Exxon executive not so long ago. No competent models to project climate patterns, including those in the Arctic. And we know that they paid millions of dollars to support organizations that put out propaganda denying that we can predict or measure the effects of fossil fuel on our climate, or even denying that climate change was happening. There have been those who have raised the question, aren't you interfering with people's First Amendment rights? The First Amendment, ladies and gentlemen, does not give you the right to commit fraud. And we are law enforcement officers. All of us do work. Every attorney general does work on fraud cases. And we are pursuing this as we would any other fraud matter. You have to tell the truth. You can't make misrepresentations of the kinds we've seen here. And the scope of the problem we're facing, the size of the corporate entities and their alliances and trade associations and other groups is massive, and it requires a multi-state effort. So I'm very honored that my colleagues are here today assembling with us. We know that in Washington there are good people who want to do the right thing on climate change, but everyone from President Obama on down is under a relentless assault from well-funded, highly aggressive, and morally vacant forces that are trying to block every step by the federal government to take meaningful action. So today, this is not a situation where financial damages alone can deal with the problem. We have to change conduct.
Well, here's some comments from a leading proponent of climate change. I'm sure you will recognize this person.
We do not have 40 years to continue suffering the consequences of the fraud allegedly being committed by the fossil fuel companies where climate change is concerned. The scientific community has been all but unanimous for a long time now, but now Mother Nature and the laws of physics, harder to ignore than scientists, are making it abundantly clear that we have to change. And the cumulative amount of that man-made global warming pollution now traps as much extra heat energy in the Earth's system as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours on the surface of our planet. These storms will reach out thousands of kilometers to funnel all that extra humidity and water vapor into these massive record-breaking downpours. And occasionally it creates a snowpocalypse or a snowmageddon, but most often record-breaking floods. We've had 7 once-in-a-thousand-year floods in the last 10 years in the U.S. Every night on the news now, it's like a nature hike through the book of Revelation, because those who are using unfair and illegal means to try to prevent the change are likely now, finally, at long last, to be held to account. And that will remove the last barriers to allow the American people to move forward and to redeem the promise of our president and our country in the historic meeting in Paris last December, where the United States led the global coalition to form the first global agreement.
Well, a few comments. One, I'm really glad he didn't win the electoral vote in 2000. Number two, he's lying. But number three is you should take away from this that this is what's coming. They're going to use the law to force people to speak and think a certain way. And I think this is indicative, and this is going to become a global thing at some point. And I think it's just indicative of the times that we live in. I think it's a very significant sign. They're trying to do this through corporations too, though. So we have school district We have state attorneys general acknowledging that, well, the federal government would do this if they could, if they didn't have opposition, an opposition party. Now we're going to turn to corporations to see what's happening. In North Carolina, they recently enacted a religious freedom bill that if, as a matter of conscience, you didn't want to bake a cake for a gay wedding, you didn't have to. The reaction to that from corporate America has been severe and swift. The government's looking into it. Look at this article from the New York Times a week ago. It says this. The Obama administration is considering whether North Carolina's new law on gay and transgender rights makes the state ineligible for billions of dollars in federal aid for schools, highways, and housing, officials said Friday. Anthony Fox, the Secretary of Transportation, first raised the prospect of a review of federal funding in public remarks on Tuesday in North Carolina. The Department of Transportation provides roughly $1 billion a year to North Carolina. The New York Times then asked other federal agencies whether they were conducting similar reviews. Department of Education spokeswoman Dory Nolt said on Friday that her agency was also reviewing the North Carolina law to determine any potential impact on the state's federal education funding. She added, "We will not hesitate to act if students' civil rights are being violated." The agency said it provided $4.3 billion to North Carolina last year for kindergarten through 12th grade as well as colleges. The Department of Housing and Urban Development said it was doing a similar evaluation. We're reviewing the effects of the law on HUD funding allocated for North Carolina, said Cameron French, a department spokesperson. White House officials had no comment. Yeah, they don't know anything. Although later in the article, they do have a comment, and they said that the law, the North Carolina law, was mean-spirited. The article continues. Mr. Forrest is correct that federal anti-discrimination laws do not explicitly mention gay and transgender people. The Obama administration has repeatedly called on Congress to pass a law banning discrimination against them in employment decisions. On several occasions, however, the administration has also said that gay, lesbian, and transgender people are already covered by laws banning sex discrimination. Last year, a federal judge in Virginia rejected that notion, ruling that restricting the bathroom choices for transgender students did not violate federal law. The Obama administration had argued otherwise, and the case is on appeal. So I think that what they're going to do is they're going to go forward anyway, regardless of what the case law says. I mean, this is the way things are being done. Loretta Lynch, back in June of 2015, gave remarks at the Lambda Legal annual reception in Washington, D.C. She said this at the time. And thanks to your courage, Lambda Legal is a LGBT legal organization to advance LGBT rights. And thanks to your courage, your devotion, this is Loretta Lynch speaking, your devotion and your tenacity in recent years, the fight for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender equality has reached an incredible crescendo. Through the vigorous campaigns of pioneers, activists, and allies, many of whom emerged from the nation's legal community, we have witnessed a profound national pivot away from hate and intolerance and toward acceptance, respect, and understanding. These remarks were made about 1 week before the Supreme Court's decision in the Obergefell case. Lawmakers, the article continues, lawmakers had said in North Carolina that they were trying to prevent men from dressing as women to enter bathrooms and commit assaults. Critics said there was no evidence that that had happened. Now listen, this is completely contrary to the facts. The very next day, this article was on Breitbart saying, man dressed as woman busted for videoing in ladies' bathroom. And this is something that has continued on. Now, in the North Carolina case, the situation has also involved corporations. The NBA has said it's moving its All-Star game that was scheduled for Charlotte next year. PayPal has said that it would not open a facility that it had previously agreed to open in North Carolina. Bruce Springsteen canceled a concert. Disney and Hollywood film companies have said they're pulling any filming and any business they have in the state out of the state. And this is corporations, private corporations that are trying to enforce a form of thought control on people. So just be aware that it's coming. And in the White House, while they may not have had a comment on this other than it was mean-spirited, they're involved in a lot of other things. Here's Valerie Jarrett was speaking recently, and she said this. She demanded an end to gender bias in media and toys. And you're going to see more and more of these things. And then finally this, the person who put out the videos, the Center for, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they put out the Planned Parenthood sting videos that showed them talking about selling and buying baby parts. They raided his home. They took all of his computers, all of his logs, all of his personal materials, and they've taken them. Now, supposedly they're doing this in the course of because of an investigation into some crime, but they've taken everything. And the Attorney General of Kamala Harris of California is trying to shut down any dissent on the issue of abortion. It's just the way it is, and I think it's the way it's going to be. So you just need to know that this is coming, and I think it's indicative of the times that we live in. And here's a story out of Britain. A National Health Service worker had given a book, a Christian book, to a Muslim colleague, and she was fired. And she's now lost her appeal, and she's now suspended from work permanently because she tried to reach out and share her faith with a Muslim colleague who was a friend of hers. So this is the type of thing that's coming. Well, I'm going to wrap up this week's prophecy update. I just wanted to share with you a few things that you need to be aware of and looking out for. We'll take this up next week. But be on the lookout for these things, because I think these things, if corporations are doing this in North Carolina, they're going to start doing this to their employees over time. And I think we've already seen some indicators that this is happening. And this is fascism, and I think it's an indicator that we live in the end times. God bless.